Welcome back to the 96th online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, coming to you today from DIMC Azusa, California. In the previous session, we looked at the Lakkhana Sutta, and today we continue on our journey through an anthology of important suttas from the Buddhist scriptures by looking at a discourse called the Dīghajāṇu Sutta. I estimate today's session will run to about an hour and 10 minutes with a 30-minute break halfway through for some meditation. Studying the Dīghajāṇu Sutta is an opportunity for us to look at the first part of the Buddhist materials that today deal with economics. It was not actually a Buddhist who coined the term Buddhist economics, but the economist E.F. Schumacher in his famous book Small is Beautiful. The book was subtitled A Study of Economics as if People Mattered. Ironically, Buddhists often tend to disregard economics completely because the monastic way of life idealized by Buddhism is economically very minimalist. Such disinterest in economic values has no scriptural basis, however, because Buddhist scriptures are in fact very rich with advice from the Buddha regarding sound economic values, and they are applicable to monastic and lay lifestyles alike. Economic values in Buddhism are considered to be interwoven with quality of life, conforming with the tagline, as if people mattered, in Schumacher's book. But in Buddhism, we define the quality of life not only in terms of material comfort, but also in terms of mental well-being and ultimately liberation of the mind from negative latent tendencies. So value is sometimes couched in quite abstract terms. Nonetheless, the teachings we will be looking at today from the Dīghajāṇu Sutta have been claimed as the basis for building a sustainable economy. Contrary to popular rumors to the contrary, the Buddha never discouraged wealth, but he did prohibit poverty. So, not talking about monks, but for householders, the Buddha taught in the Anatta Sutta that lay people should expect to derive happiness from ownership, consumption, freedom from debt, and blamelessness. Nonetheless, to curb possible excesses of consumption, Buddhism praises contentment and limitation of desires, but does not advocate poverty. What is important as a Buddhist, however, in the economic process, whether one is earning, saving, or using money, is that one should never compromise one's ethical principles. A Buddhist who has become wealthy should use their wealth in a way that supports a wholesome aim in life, rather than frittering away money aimlessly or in a way that leads to further proliferation of defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind. It is not to say that riches cannot, to a certain extent, buy happiness. Even Nobel Prize winners Kahneman and Deaton found in 2010 that happiness tended to plateau beyond a household income of $75,000. But riches used aimlessly may create more damage than good. But it would seem that Buddhists are saying that if wealth is truly to bring happiness, it must be applied to support the emergence of higher spiritual values, especially virtues and virtuous people, which according to Buddhist economics have more value than anyone can put a price on. According to the master nun who founded our main temple in Thailand, with a well-trained group of people in front of me, ready to work for good in society, I feel that I am already a multimillionaire, because even if I were to have 10 million, I could still not guarantee being able to train up even one person in such a group. So, this session we will have the first of two sessions on Buddhist economics, this time covering microeconomics for the here and now and for the hereafter, using the Dīghajāṇu Sutta as the backbone of our study. Next session we will continue to look at microeconomics on the ultimate level and macroeconomics. So for today, for the Dīghajāṇu Sutta, we will work our way through the usual sequence of sources, sutta name meaning, interlocutors, place names, and overview, before looking at the main body of the sutta itself and finishing up with some of the issues the sutta raises. The sutta we'll be studying in today's session comes from the fourth volume of the Anguttara Nikaya, specifically the Book of Eights or Atthaka Nipata. It is thus referenced in Western scholarship as A4281 or AN8.54. Today the translation manuscript I've made use of is Bhikkhu Bodhi's 2012 Wisdom Publications edition version of the Numerical Discourses of the Buddha, which I have now managed to get a copy of. For commentary today, I'm able to draw heavily on the Venerable Dīghajāṇu's book Buddhist Economics, which I translated to English back in 2010. So the location associated with the sutta is the Kolya territory, which was ruled by republican clans in the time of the Buddha. The Kolya owned two chief settlements, one at Ramagama and the other at Dīghajāṇu. Dīghajāṇu was where the Buddha's family came from on his mother's side. Formerly, the Kolyans and Sakyans on the father's side had been rivals. Kakarapata, that was the place this discourse was given, was just a township in the Kolya territory, probably a market town, and is not mentioned anywhere else in the Tipitaka. Only two people are mentioned by name in the sutta. The conversation in the sutta is between the Buddha and a young man called Dīghajāṇu Vayakapacha. So his personal name seems to have been Dīghajāṇu, which literally means long knee, and his clan name or surname appears to have been Vayakapacha, which literally means tiger foot or tiger path. This latter appellation is attributed to his ancestors being born on a forest path infested with tigers. The Buddha tends to refer to him by his clan name. Dīghajāṇu's backstory is that he was apparently not short on wealth, but had failed to use his wealth to achieve any satisfaction in life. The Buddha, who is the other interlocutor in this sutta, is referred to in this translation variously as the Blessed One, the Tathagata, or just Bhante. So the name of this sutta is the Dīghajāṇu Sutta, which means the discourse to Dīghajāṇu. However, it also goes by the name Vayakapacha Sutta, in which case it would mean the discourse to Vayakapacha. Of course, both names refer to the same person. So coming to our backstory, it turns out that the Dīghajāṇu Sutta is one of the go-to texts in the Pali Canon for understanding the Buddha's moral expectations of his lay followers. The sutta has been described as one of a number of texts dealing with different aspects of household life, united by an emphasis on right livelihood. In Pali, Sammachiva. Bhikkhu Bodhi identifies a common thread among such texts as being an emphasis on right conduct, as exemplified by adherence to the 5 precepts. In addition to the precepts, as in the Sigalawada Sutta, the Dīghajāṇu Sutta also warns against the dangers of the 4 roads to ruin and commends associating with good-hearted friends. So turning to the manuscript, after all our contextual information in paragraph 1, we see in paragraph 2 the origin of this sutta was 2 questions which Dīghajāṇu asked the Buddha. Firstly, how to find happiness in the present lifetime. Later on in the sutta, he asks how to find happiness in the next lifetime. His questions are particularly pertinent to principles of practice applicable to economics for the household life, rather than the monastic one. The answers the Buddha gave were formulated as the 4 principles of finding happiness in the present lifetime and the 4 principles of finding happiness in lifetimes to come. So the first half of the sutta deals with Buddhist microeconomics for the here and now. In paragraph 3, the Buddha gave a total of 4 principles of economic practice for finding happiness in the present lifetime, or as is known in the Pali, Ditta Dhammikata Samvata Nika Dhamma. These 4 principles are then expanded upon in subsequent paragraphs. In paragraph 4, the Buddha expands upon the virtue of diligent acquisition, in the manuscript translated as accomplishment in initiative, which comes from the Pali word Uttana Sampata. Sticking to my own translation, diligent acquisition means skillfulness in the acquisition of wealth. Diligent acquisition refers to the habits of a person who works hard for their living, in contrast to those who are too lazy to make the effort. It also refers to the patience needed for people to work together as a team and the wisdom to recognize the work left undone. Being able to perform, organize, and administer work tasks as required. The most important feature of this first stage of the economic process can be summarized as acquiring wealth in an ethical way. As Buddhists, we would say that taking advantage of others economically, in whatever form, is unethical acquisition of wealth. Particular forms of livelihood which the Buddha advised against are the 5 sorts of unwholesome trade, in Pali language, micca vanicca, namely the selling of weapons, slaves, flesh, intoxicants, or poison. The weapon trade is a major source of income for every superpower of the world, but weapon suppliers earn the hatred of the victims and their families, maimed or killed by the weapons which they've sold. Selling weapons is the starting point of a long chain of negative karmic consequences, and although it is not my place to say which belligerent is justified at any time in history, no one can deny the magnitude of the death toll coming from armed conflict. Not selling weapons means refraining from any sort of trade in instruments for destroying life, whether it be guns, knives, or even hunting equipment such as traps or bait. Anything used for killing people or animals can be considered as weapons for the purposes of wrong livelihood. The second form of wrong livelihood is trading or trafficking in people. Trading in people also makes direct profit out of the suffering of others. It formerly meant trading in slaves, but nowadays has come to include child labor, wage slaves, and prostitution. The third sort of wrong livelihood is selling live animals to the slaughterhouse. Selling live animals to the slaughterhouse is taking a profit from the suffering of animals in a way that leads inevitably to their death, even if the seller is not involved directly in slaughter. The fourth sort of wrong livelihood is trading in alcohol or intoxicants. Trading in alcohol and intoxicants, including non-medicinal drugs such as marijuana. Despite relaxation of marijuana and cannabis rules in certain countries recently, the legal status does not affect the karmic retribution. The final sort of wrong livelihood is trading in poison. Trading in poison means selling poison such as insecticide, rat poison, or products for assassination. The Buddha advised us not to sell such substances because otherwise their retribution will find its way back to us. It's not to say that there are no more than these 5 ways of unwholesomely earning a living. In Blessing 18, I mentioned unscrupulous members of the medical profession, officials taking bribes, sneaky customers, and soldiers. Criminal activities would of course count as unwholesome acquisition. Even usury, or making one's living from charging interest on loans, in effect is making a living out of the suffering of people who are incompetent in managing their own finances. However, in the Dīghajāṇu Sutta, only unwholesome merchandise is mentioned specifically. The Buddha taught that any person who lapses into unwholesome livelihood will eventually attract a heavy burden of negative karma for themselves. Turning to paragraph 5, we see that the second way to ensure economic happiness in the present lifetime is conservation, in Pali language, araka sampatha. Careful conservation means skillfulness in the saving of wealth. Having earned wealth by the sweat of their brow in a scrupulous way, a person should take care of their wealth, not allowing it to be eroded away by unjust taxation, theft, natural disaster, or bogus heirs. As for unwholesome conservation of wealth, this would refer to excessive hoarding or stockpiling. Furthermore, when saving up one's wealth, one should not allow doing so to bring us into conflict with those around us. Good reasons to put money on one side according to Buddhist principles are in case of unexpected emergencies, such as fire, flood, excess taxation, theft, or extortion by greedy relatives. You need to consider carefully, however, what form you ought to save your money in. Of course, the best way to conserve wealth is as transcendental wealth of merit, because in such a form it is beyond the touch of interest rates, and it will appreciate with the passing of the years. But this needs to be balanced with more pragmatic considerations of prior present lifetime responsibilities. Turning to paragraph 6, we see that the third way to ensure economic happiness in the present lifetime is to associate with virtuous friends, known in Pali language as kalyana mittata. Having Having virtuous friends means surrounding yourself with a network of virtuous friends in all areas of your life. The sort of friends one should cultivate are those endowed with faith, self-discipline, self-sacrifice, and, of course, wisdom. The set of qualities we will meet up with again as factors ensuring economic happiness in future lifetimes. If we take care of others, we will find that our self-respect grows and flourishes, and that this is the basis of our growing confidence, courage, and ease of heart. Being a friend to ourselves and being a friend to others is really the same thing. A true friend is someone who will tell us their secrets and will not betray our secrets to others, while also being completely honest with us and warning us if he or she thinks that we are heading toward danger. Apart from facilitating our own cultivation of wisdom, we should also strengthen a network of good friends of which we are a part. Such networking is particularly relevant to teamwork because when one earns one's living, one does not usually do so alone, whether it be working in the same office as one's colleagues or cooperating in an international network. The most important attribute of teamwork is that the team members must have a similarly high level of scrupulousness in their work dealings and a similarly high level of faith in spiritual teachings. Furthermore, every member of a team should have a similarly high level of self-sacrifice, dedicated to the collective good, thereby avoiding the dangers of networking with those who are overcome by their own selfishness. The Buddha taught that worldly wealth can be exhausted in a moment, but the value of training other people to be virtuous never knows an end. The importance of this virtue is emphasized over and over again by the Buddha, who, especially in the context of economics, taught us that simply acquiring, storing, and using wealth is not good enough. We have to build up a network of good people to work with as well, before we get round to spending our wealth. It would spell financial disaster to associate with those who break the precepts. The Buddha's advice is to be selective about channeling our resources, devoting our resources to encourage the proliferation of virtuous people in our society. Those who encourage virtue in their co-workers at the same time they earn their living will never have to complain at a later date about being betrayed by their colleagues. Turning to paragraph 7, we see that the fourth and final way to ensure economic happiness in the present lifetime is to spend within our means, known in Pali as sammajivita. So, living within our means thriftiness in spending. Those who realize the ease with which wealth can come and go should lead their life in a way that is appropriate to their means, not being excessively extravagant, but at the same time not being too spendthrift either. Under this heading, generosity or dana also needs to be addressed, where it would mean sharing those things which are surplus to our needs. Some people might doubt as to how much they really need, or might be unable to distinguish between need and want, and hence the Buddha gave guidance about how householders should budget their earnings so that their generosity is neither reluctant nor a burden on the family expenditure. The Buddha taught in the Anguttara Nikaya's Adya Sutta that the family budget should be divided into 5. He did not say each part has to be 20% of your earnings, but he taught that a person should budget for each of these sorts of expenditure. For the working capital which you built up for yourself, the Buddha taught in the Sigalovada Sutta, which we saw back in B053, that 1/4 of earnings should be set aside for your immediate needs, 1/2 should be reinvested in the business, and the remaining 1/4 should be saved in case of emergency. It's up to each individual to decide how much of their income to use as working capital and how much to use for generosity. If a person budgets in this way, it will be easy for them to practice generosity, giving neither too much nor too little. The 5-fold division of one's funds should be as follows. 1 part should be in the support of the immediate needs of yourself, your parents, your children, spouse, and your employees. 1 part should be to extend generosity towards your friends. 1 part should be saved in case of emergency, as already mentioned, and 1 part should be used for 5 sorts of dedication, for one's extended family, for hospitality, and for dedicating merit for the departed, for taxes, and lastly for dedicating merit to the things that you believe in according to your local custom, which might, depending on your culture, include things like ascetics, animals, physical forces and elements, lower deities or higher deities. Finally, one part needs to be put aside to extend support to well-practicing monks and ascetics. Incidentally, in Thailand, the 4 principles of economic practice for finding happiness in the present lifetime have been nicknamed the 4 chambers of the millionaire's heart, which I've shown diagrammatically on the slide. Paragraph 8 refers to an eater of figs. By way of clarification, it is said that in the old days of Thailand, that an extravagant person with a low income was like the owner of a fig tree who shakes the tree so that all the figs fall off, but who picks up only a few of them to eat. At the other extreme, a person with a good income who is not generous with their wealth will die in hardship out of keeping with their social status. Steering the middle way between stinginess and extravagance in a way appropriate to your level of income is said to be living within your means. Aside from the 5 forms of unwholesome livelihood which cause deterioration of wealth, there are another 4 sorts of behavior known as the 4 roads to ruin, rather than the 6 we met up with in the Dīghajāṇu Sutta, which, if we can avoid them, will also help to protect our hard-earned income. This means specifically avoiding frequenting prostitutes, avoiding drinking alcohol, avoiding gambling, and not associating with bad company. This is part of the importance of associating with a good set of friends mentioned earlier. In conclusion, throughout one's life, one should earn one's living carefully according to the 4 principles of happiness in the present lifetime, never compromising one's Buddhist scrupulousness, and the same goes for saving one's wealth. At the same time, one needs to nurture those around us as a protective fence or network of good friends. Surrounded by virtuous people, the tendency for our mind to be tempted by unethical compromises or squandering of wealth, and the interactions which we have with our fellow workers will be for the mutual encouragement of further good deeds. Turning to paragraph 9, we see the metaphor of the reservoir. The 4 economic principles for happiness in the present lifetime can be compared to 4 channels of water which supply the reservoir. The 4 roads to ruin can be compared to 4 outlets from the reservoir. If we close the inlets and open the outlets, in the absence of rain, the reservoir will soon become completely dry. There will certainly be no increase in the water level. On the contrary, if one opens all 4 of the inlets by conducting oneself in keeping with the Buddhist economic principles, while closing the outlets by avoiding all the 4 roads to ruin, before long the reservoir will be full, or even overflowing. Therefore, whether we are speaking economically on a personal level or on a national level, it is vital to seal up the 4 possible outlets from our economic prosperity by not supporting the sex industry, drinking alcohol or gambling, and by associating with good friends. As we are reminded in paragraph 10, these are the basics of Buddhist microeconomics for the present lifetime, economics that you won't find described anywhere else in the world. If you heed the Buddha's words on economics and put them into practice, you will never fall on hard times and will enjoy happiness in the present lifetime. So having completed our explanation of the basics of Buddhist economics for bringing happiness in the present lifetime, before continuing with happiness in the lifetime to come, let's take a break halfway and settle ourselves for 30 minutes of meditation, which today takes as its theme the power of kindness. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. So we start by making sure we're sitting comfortably with our back fairly straight, without being strained or overarched. It's fine to sit in a chair or on an arrangement of cushions on the floor. For this meditation, it's ideal to be seated in a comfortable yet upright position, as long as you can ensure you will be comfortable for the entire session. So take a few moments to settle into a position that feels comfortable for you. And bear in mind, you can readjust your posture later too, at any time, if you need to. When you're ready, you can gently close your eyes. Now begin taking a few deep breaths without undue effort. Use the full capacity of your lungs to take a deep breath in, filling your lungs. Then breathe out, releasing all the stale air as you continue to take a few more deep breaths. Pay particular attention to the sensation of your breathing in and out, feeling the breath as it enters your nostrils, fills your chest and abdomen, and then releases. Then allow the breath to become natural without forcing it or controlling it. And we become aware of how we're feeling without any judgment of this. We begin to get a feel for the body, noticing its shape and position, again without any judgment. We let any tension dissolve and allow our muscles to relax all the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes. So now we come to time for relaxing the mind. We take the rare opportunity to withdraw our attention from any ambient sounds, whether they are loud or soft, far away or close by. Additionally, our mind can become inundated with thoughts or worries. So let's put as many thoughts as we can to one side, so that we're left with a less cluttered mind. Like a person with no future and no past, as if all we have is the present moment, the here and now. We might imagine that we're sitting all alone in a vast space, and all around us is nothing and no one. If our mind drifts back into thought, we just let the thoughts settle toward silence for a few moments, gradually gaining mindfulness, where being mindful for now means simply being aware, conscious, and present in the moment. We focus our attention on one moment at a time. We needn't concern ourselves with what has already gone by, and there's no need to anticipate the future. And when we're ready, we begin to direct our attention inside the body. And to help keep our mind in place, we can picture the image of the sun shining in our mind, the same sort of sun we might see if we were walking at the seaside and saw the sun on the horizon, shining bright, clear and round. We visualize without making any effort, because it's the natural ability of the mind to picture things internally. Whenever we think of anything, a picture of that thing will arise in the mind. That's the way we visualize the shining sun at the center of the body, or at the place you feel most comfortable, wherever we experience it the most distinctly, whether it be at the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. and we'll continue to keep our awareness in touch with the inner object the whole of the time. We rest our attention with the same lightness as a butterfly alighting on a flower petal. Meanwhile, if we find our mind wandering, we calmly bring our attention back to the inner object by relocating our awareness there. In spite of inner focus during meditation, many people find that the stream of thoughts in the mind is almost continuous. It can sometimes be hard to find a single break in the thoughts to give ourselves that sense of peace and quiet that we need. In such a case, to open up a space between the thoughts in the mind, we make use of something called a mantra, which is basically a word that we repeat to ourselves silently, as if we hear the sound of it coming up from the center of our inner object. The traditional mantra for this meditation method is the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And we hear the sound of those words coming up as if like a silent music from the center of ourselves, from the center of the inner object, over and over again, gently encouraging the mind to become free of thought, while at the same time linking our awareness more closely with the inner object. So we continue to cultivate the mind in this way, maintaining our inner focus while keeping our mind free of thoughts, lightly and gently, for a few more moments now in silence. If our mind wanders, we shouldn't let it cause us concern. We shouldn't even pay attention to whatever has captured our attention. We just let go of the thought or feeling and return to our awareness. It's okay if we get distracted by our thoughts, or we just bring our attention back again to our center. If our thoughts waver, we simply acknowledge the thought rather than trying to add to it. We let them pass and bring our awareness back to the center. If we find ourselves emerging from a cloud and realize a lot of time has elapsed since we were last aware, that is the moment to consciously practice compassion for ourselves. However long it's been or however far away our mind has wandered, we can always begin again. And little by little in our meditation, we gradually cultivate positive aspects of the mind, such as the much undervalued quality of kindness. Those who belittle kindness seem to equate it with lip service to righteousness, or see it as a second best to wisdom, clarity, or incisiveness. The good intentions of those who haven't been able to make any substantial difference in the world. In fact, kindness on the level of the mind is like a thread of meaning, where we find out if we can be profoundly kind to ourselves, while at the same time strongly dedicated to kindness for those around us. It becomes a movement of the heart, so deep and subtle, that it's like a movement of the sea close to the ocean floor. As people get older, they come to value good-heartedness more and more in those around them. Kindness is based on the observation that deep down there is no one who doesn't want to be happy, or at least have the chance to be happy. The warm-heartedness of kindness supplants cynicism. Compassion overcomes indifference to others. Caring melts away standoffishness. It helps to roll back the misapprehension that in a dog-eat-dog world, it's better to have no close friends, because it's too tiring to care for anyone else. However, the wisdom of meditation would say, when watching after oneself, one watches after others, and when watching after others, one watches after oneself. By sustaining meditation and having access to our inner world of thoughts and feelings, we can understand our deeper motivations more and more. As we begin to catch sight of the fleeting impulses in our own minds, by cultivating patience, by renouncing cruelty, by the tender, loving care of others, we find that our self-respect grows and flourishes, and that this is the base of our growing confidence, courage, and ease of heart. Because a life suffused with kindness is not just an ideal, but an action. So, including the power of kindness in our inner cultivation, we keep our mind gently on track within ourselves for a few more moments in silence, until we come to time for some loving kindness meditation. And as we come to the final phase of our meditation, we find that the center of our body is much more than a defined area, but can expand concentrically without limits, as a direct way to cultivate the power of kindness within us. And on top of this expansion of inner experience, we can superimpose silent repetition of certain phrases which are like an offering through the expression of the heart. Being words, they would tend to be imperfect, but that's okay. Traditionally, the first recipient of loving kindness is always ourselves, because the logic is that we have to have kindness for ourselves first, before we gain kindness to share with others. So we might extend heartfelt phrases to ourselves like, "May I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease," where living with ease means the things of day-to-day life like livelihood and family may not be such a struggle. We can use these phrases or other phrases that seem more relevant and simply let them resonate from our center with enough space and silence that it forms a rhythm that's pleasing to us, like the song of the heart. Repeating the affirmation, "May I be healthy," over and over again might be dismissed by some as magical thinking, to expect it will protect us from ever getting sick. However, it's more accurate to regard the phrase as a way of surrounding ourselves with beneficence and goodwill, instead of disparaging ourselves or carping at ourselves. Practicing in this way, meditation teaches us gentleness and an ability to more easily forgive our mistakes in life in order to overcome them. In the same way, we widen the inner experience beyond our body to all living beings around us. Together with phrases or affirmations, again, it's not magical thinking, because it was once said, if you find it in your heart to care for somebody else, you have already succeeded in kindness. Nonetheless, we don't struggle to fabricate a feeling or sentiment, but perhaps try out the phrases for size in our mind, in a way that lifts us out of our old dynamics and frees us from the limitations of defining circumstances and personalities, in an adventurous expanse of our own power of kindness, with the words, "May you live in safety. May you have the peace and joy of mental happiness. May you have the health and freedom from pain that represents physical happiness. May the elements of your daily life allow you to live with ease and without struggle," elevating those living beings from the status of neutral objects to those that are loved and appreciated through a capacity for kindness that is intelligent and wise. Finally, we extend our loving kindness to its furthest extent with the wish, may all beings everywhere, all people, all creatures, all those in existence, near and far, known and unknown, may all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And we continue in this way for the last few moments of our meditation together in silence. Sappha Putthanuppāvēna, Sappha Dhammānuppāvēna, Sappha Saṅghānuppāvēna Sattha Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So to return gently to our subject matter for today, as we follow through the manuscript of the Dīghajāṇu Sutta, we turn now from the Buddhist microeconomics for the present lifetime, and from paragraph 11 onwards we start to look at the Buddhist microeconomics for the hereafter. The Buddhist philosophers of old regarded a person's life as comparable to a business, which could be run at a profit or at a loss. For those interested only in worldly wealth, but who ignored spiritual values, their business was seen to trade only in worldly wealth. However, for those who consecrated time for spiritual practice, they additionally regarded their profit and loss in the spiritual terms of merit and demerit. Therefore, afterlife destinations also influenced economic choices in the present lifetime. As Dīghajāṇu was wise enough not to be entirely attached to material benefit in the present life, he decided to ask the Buddha a second question about his happiness and benefit for lifetimes to come. In paragraph 11, we see the Buddha's outline of the 4 practices for happiness in the hereafter, known in Pali as Samparayikata Samvatadika Dhamma, and our translation uses the terms for these of faith, accomplishment in virtuous behavior, accomplishment in generosity, and accomplishment in wisdom. Turning to paragraph 12, the Buddha expands upon the first practice for happiness in the hereafter, which is faithfulness, or, as it's known in Pali, Sattha Sampatha. Faithfulness is something that arises in a person when they have confidence rather than blind faith or gullibility, specifically in the wisdom and enlightenment of the Buddha. The benefit of having such faith in the Buddha is that one is prepared to practice in his footsteps. Faith is not an insignificant asset for a person's character because it will literally illuminate the mind from within. In general, any person who isn't a complete sociopath, who suffers from antisocial personality disorder, has a little brightness in their heart, but it tends to be fleeting like distant lightning over the horizon, or the glimmer of a firefly. Regular people might have the occasional flash of inspiration in their mind, and maybe they'd like to follow the thought through to completion. But because of lack of continuity, they are unable to put thought into action. If only had a little faith in mind to give a continuous level of brightness in the mind, they'd be able to walk the talk, allowing responsibility for good karmic actions to pave the way to a wholesome pathway in life for themselves. No one should ever underestimate faith, because it means that the mind is sufficiently illuminated to understand about the enlightenment of the Buddha, to the degree that root causes can be discerned, or at least given the benefit of the doubt, to choose appropriate rather than inappropriate behaviors. Overcoming such doubt about the Buddha and his teachings will make one more willing to practice in the Buddha's footsteps. Even an otherwise uneducated person who is endowed with faith alone still has the chance to do a lot of good in their lives, the only drawback being that faith by itself may not be very steadfast. Shoring up faith into something steadfast needs the investment of time, money, and effort in spiritual activities, so that one's faith can be developed alongside wisdom. Economically speaking, this would justify the expense of going to listen to Dhamma teachings in order to consolidate one's level of faith in the Triple Gem. In paragraph 13, the Buddha expands upon the second practice for happiness in the hereafter, which is what I've translated less ambiguously as accomplishment in self-discipline, known in Pali as Sila Sampatha. This refers to the ability to keep at least all 5 of the precepts, all the way from abstention from taking the life of living beings through abstention from drinking alcohol. Apart from sidestepping karmic retribution from breaking 5 precepts, the practitioner gradually gets to uproot even the latent tendencies that tempt them to break the precepts in the first place. In other places, the Buddha said that if we truly loved ourselves, we would never take advantage of the weaknesses of another, because if we harm another, it in some way diminishes who we are. Further motivation for such ethical strictness is that the mind filled with faith and has sufficient inner brightness to see the connections between cause and effects to ensure wholeheartedness to uphold ethical conscience. From an economic point of view, in cultivating self-discipline, a person would need to find the time to go to the temple to keep the precepts purely, rather than laboring under the misapprehension that extra salary will bring happiness both in this lifetime and the next. Moving on to paragraph 14, the Buddha expands upon the third practice for happiness in the hereafter, which I have translated as the accomplishment of self-sacrifice, rather than mere generosity, as it comes from the Pali term chaka sampata. In Buddhism, generosity is usually referred to by the Pali word dana, and means sharing what is excess to one's needs. Self-sacrifice, as denoted by the word chaka, is something which usually refers to forms of sharing that come at more of a cost to the giver. A person who is endowed with self-sacrifice, when they are free of any further stinginess in their mind, is someone who takes pleasure in giving. Such people, apart from having self-discipline and faith, can also be said to be skilled in saving up their wealth, but they choose not to invest it as stocks and shares, but as a transcendental down payment on the next life. They know that if they try to hoard what they have in this world, before long it will be nibbled away by unjust taxation, thieves, fire, flood, or bogus heirs. Some grandchildren may not be able to wait for the natural death of a wealthy grandparent, and might even conspire to do away with them in order to receive a legacy without delay. Buying shares is no real security because even the stock market can collapse. Buying foreign currency or gold offers no real security either, because the market may slump at any time. However, Buddhists believe if material wealth can be converted into merit by giving it away, it will become a form of wealth that will stay with you from one lifetime to the next, and without fear that the value of your assets will deteriorate, because on the contrary, they will only increase. Wherever there are those who practice self-sacrifice, there will never be a danger of economic exploitation. On the contrary, where self-sacrifice is abundant, everyone's financial status will improve, both giver and recipient alike. This is why self-sacrifice is so important in laying the foundation for happiness in lifetimes to come. For self-sacrifice, as mentioned before, it is implied that you need to set aside an appropriate proportion of your wealth for giving in charity to save as transcendental wealth for the next life. If a person shares wholeheartedly with others, others will share with them in return, and they will never find themselves on the breadline, living from hand to mouth, or stuck in a soul-destroying job. Moving on to paragraph 15, the Buddha expands upon the fourth and final practice for happiness in the hereafter, known as accomplishment in wisdom, or in Pali, Panya Sampata. Sometimes the word wisdom is bandied about as a synonym for knowledge. In Buddhism, however, the word specifically means penetrative insight into the vicissitudes of the psycho-physical constituents, or 5 aggregates, and into the arising and decay of all things. Knowledge of other things, for example, engineering or computing, could hardly be considered wisdom according to the Buddhist definition. True wisdom means knowing every facet of the constant change taking place in our bodily makeup, acknowledging that there is birth, old age, sickness and death, decay and destruction, as conveyed by the words arising, continuity and decay. Even though a person may have multiple academic doctorates, if they deny the unreliable substance of their body and mind, they can still be duped into economic recklessness. True wisdom supports us to uproot the last of the defilements in the mind, and can therefore bring us closer to an end of suffering. The importance of wisdom is that it shines forth like a light, which drives away the darkness that conceals the reality of the world. Wisdom also functions like a spade, which one can use to dig up the deepest roots of a poisonous weed, in this case, the poisonous attachments which pollute the mind. So, economically speaking, a person needs to be self-disciplined in the use of their wealth to give themselves sufficient freedom to use their time for meditational practice and Dhamma study to give rise to an incrementally higher level of wisdom within themselves. Of the four practices, the most important precursor of transcendental wealth is faith. Faith is something often heard about but often misunderstood. So, in view of practices for happiness in the hereafter, a person needs to start on the right foot by making sure they understand the concept of faith. With a correct understanding of faith, it will start to become clear why the Buddha advised that each time true faith arises for a person, it will destine them for wisdom. Anyone who works diligently and is not reckless with their earnings, who knows how to earn a living in an appropriate way while at the same time having faith, self-discipline, self-sacrifice, who cultivates wisdom continuously on the path to happiness in the hereafter, rather than merely so-called resume virtues, needs to make such good deeds habitual. Therefore, faith, self-discipline, self-sacrifice, and wisdom are the microeconomic practices recommended by the Buddha for happiness in lives to come. And here I'll skip the final two paragraphs of the sutta, which are just verses that add nothing to the prose that we have already seen. Uncharacteristically, we might notice that the sutta does not mention Dīghajāṇu's response to hearing the Buddha's teachings, so instead I will finish off by mentioning some of the issues raised by the sutta. So as far as I can see, there are three main issues raised by the Dīghajāṇu Sutta: distinguishing features of Buddhist economics, wealth disparity, and the economic agenda behind every war. So I'll start by trying to define the distinguishing features of Buddhist economics. There are many points of similarity and contrast between Western and Buddhist economics. What the two have in common is in their recognition of three stages of the economic process: acquisition, conservation, and investment of wealth. However, in the detail of each of these three stages, we find significant divergences. On the subject of acquisition of wealth, while Western economics recognize acquisition is important, it gives virtually no guidance for what constitutes a fair profit, just letting market competition dictate the prices. Anything that doesn't break antitrust laws is seen as fair game. Unfortunately, legal constraints are a very rough and ready indicator of ethical behavior. Even if human lives or dignity are lost or treated as acceptable collateral in stimulating the economy, it doesn't protect against economic exploitation, and the economy indirectly encroaches upon, cheats, and exploits others' happiness. For Western economics, conservation of wealth turns a blind eye to unethical hoarding to drive prices up, or as it's known in the present day, price gouging. Furthermore, there is little conscience about encouraging people to buy luxuries they cannot afford or irresponsible luring of the financially vulnerable into credit debt. In such a case, Buddhists would not agree with Western economics that such hoarding is ethically justified and would favor the sale of such products at a moderate price. Buddhists would consider it shameful to weaponize shortages of food and other essentials. The Machiavellian British response to the Irish potato famine was a historical case in point of the failings of Western economic policy. Also, because debt is equated with unhappiness, spending beyond one's means is not something Buddhists would encourage in good conscience. For Western economics, needless spending to satisfy desires would be seen as a good stimulus for the economy. By contrast, Buddhist economics would advocate spending one's resources in moderation and only in order to give the greatest possible amount of true happiness for all. Moderation is a word that is particularly useful when it comes to distinguishing between need and want. Buddhists would often consider that the only real human needs are the basic needs of clothing, food, shelter, and medicine. Buddhists define need as clothing enough to protect oneself from heat and cold, food to stave off hunger, shelter to protect us from the elements, and medical care to treat us when we are sick. Anything beyond this would, strictly speaking, be considered wants. Although we might not all be able to get by on the monastic level of needs, At least it would give us the perspective to avoid becoming prey to marketing executives who want us to regard consumption of luxuries as an end in itself. The Buddha would see moderation as an antidote for consumption to excess, and would say that moderation in fact contributes to economic well-being. Most people are only interested in how high their income is. However, the master nun Kunyai Chandra always taught her students that more important still is how much a person is left with at the end of the month. An old Thai aphorism advised, don't just eat because you feel like it, eat when you're hungry. Because we can feel like eating for 24 hours a day. If appetite were our only guide, then we would all end up as gluttons. Similarly, it's not only the net income which counts, but how much is left after we take care of our basic expenses. The secret of having something left is to expend only in the case of need and not want. However, because people know no moderation in their consumption, then we are all skewered by the economics of scarcity. Furthermore, Buddhists think that apart from fulfilling needs, what we spend should be channeled into causes that give the greatest possible amount of true happiness for all. Consider how much the world could be improved if all the money squandered worldwide on gambling, drugs, and weapons were redirected into feeding the hungry, giving basic education, or instilling virtue in the hearts of our planet's citizens. Even if not all the money were to be redirected, maybe just 5 to 10%, our world would be a much more attractive place to live in. Unfortunately, because such a large amount of money has been sunk into businesses that involve the roads to ruin or the drains on our reservoir seen earlier, our whole world has become inundated with the collateral of social problems, and consequently the opportunity to encourage virtue in society diminishes with every passing year. The second issue brought up by the Dīghajāṇu Sutta is the subject of wealth disparity. In the West, we are accustomed to feeling relieved when we hear the economy is booming. However, we sometimes fail to realize what those economic figures actually mean in terms of quality of life. Ironically, all it takes for a country to be considered economically strong is for its economic figures to look good. If every household in a certain country or society were wealthy, of course that country or society would have good economic figures to show for itself. What averaged economic figures conceal is the poverty of the majority that is balanced by extreme wealth by a tiny elite. Really, it should be the economic status of the majority which most accurately indicates the true economic status of that country or society. Furthermore, there is an insidious economic colonization of many countries in the world. Thailand's economy, for one, is basically bankrolled by Singapore and China. Other small countries have their economies pegged to the currencies of superpowers, meaning there is a terrible imbalance of power. On the small scale, the seriousness of economic exploitation, of course, depends on how far people are prepared to go to achieve their economic ends. This is why in Buddhist economics, as we have seen earlier, unlike the economics of the West, stipulates that the factor of virtuous friendship, the sense of using money for the common good, or to uplift the goodness of others rather than make a profit at the expense of others. Third and last, Buddhist economics is a whistleblower for the economic hidden agenda behind every war. The whole history of our planet, from ancient times until now, has been punctuated by wars, whether it be world wars or more localized ones. However, once war breaks out, the nature of the problem is often distorted to make it look as if it has religious or ethnic causes. Even in recent years, with ongoing armed hostility and breakdown of the rule-based order around the world, it is hard to ignore the way economic tensions rather than religious or ethnic intolerance is the number one factor presenting as an existential threat to humanity. Wars like the Crusades lasted centuries, and upon first sight they may seem to be nothing more than a religious war between Christians and Muslims. However, if examined in more depth, they turned out to be the result of badly organized economic policy, admixed with incompatible beliefs only added in as an afterthought. If you look behind the surface of any other religious war which has broken out in history, you'll always find a hidden agenda of the economic advantage behind the conflict. It is only with the admixture of other elements that turns the conflict into a war. I say this because the outbreak of war can usually be traced back to financial strife, or else problems of the abuse of economic knowledge. When one nation's army turns its guns on another, far from starting a war, they are just the puppets of a war started long ago through economic exploitation. In the absence of any ethical guidelines, when any means seems justified by economic ends, it's no surprise that the conflicts continue to escalate. Violence has indeed proliferated to a point where it is difficult to see how we can personally do anything to ameliorate the situation without remedies of a similarly large scale. Condoning unethical economic practices is as good as adding fuel to the fire of armed aggression on our planet. If it wasn't for economic difficulties, why would groups take sides to interrupt business as usual? This is why we cannot afford to ignore the hidden, entangled web of economic hardship underlying human conflict. The abuse of economic knowledge has undermined social harmony all the way from earning to saving and expenditure, with every step of the economic process being vulnerable to those substituting cruelty for human kindness. With Western economics, ethical issues are often intentionally overlooked under the pretext of objectivity, but unfortunately this leaves the door open to all sorts of economic exploitation. Although opponents may never be threatened with knives or guns, economic sanctions often cause more suffering to the common people than to the belligerents in power. In conclusion, we can say that Buddhist economics and Western economics diverge whenever economic advantage is used as a reason to justify conflict. In Buddhist economics, economic advantage is not seen as adequate justification for exploitative ends. To end on a more positive note, I recently read an article by someone called Dr. Kustiani Wijewardena on a sort of right livelihood concern called Prema Mart in Semarang, Indonesia, which not only encourages sustainable grassroots handicrafts, but supports mindfulness training and humanitarian work with its profits. This is one practical example of a business that has been based on the principles of sustainable Buddhist economics rooted in the teachings of the Dīghajāṇu Sutta. So today we've been looking at the Dīghajāṇu Sutta. For my next live session online, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, we'll complete our look at Buddhist economics by examining Buddhist microeconomics for ultimate concerns and Buddhist macroeconomics. So, for good measure, I'd like to remind viewers to keep the questions coming in about meditation or topics you have learned in the lecture to the email address that you can see spelled out in the slide, and I'll try my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you'll be better able to earn, save, and deploy your hard-earned income in a way that brings the highest benefit for yourself and others in this lifetime and in the hereafter. So that's all for today. Thanks for viewing. So long, folks, and stay safe.